All right, so we're just waiting on one participant, but I can just get started. So like I said, we were hoping to do a quick Q&A session just about elements of peer review and specifically opening up aspects of peer review. It'll be, ideally, we've probably got 25 minutes left, so it'll be a 20-minute Q&A, and we'd love it if you participate in the poll as well. Can you hear me okay? Out the back? Do you want to mic up? Okay, I'll shout. So obviously peer review is sort of an inescapable, pretty much inescapable component of academic life and publishing. Though interestingly, though, it's everywhere. Journals differ substantially in the way that they actually carry out peer review, both within their discipline and across disciplines. Opening up aspects of peer review is something that we've talked a little bit about, or is growing greater attention over the last decades. There's talk about improvements in part of the process by opening up aspects, but by opening up, we may also make ourselves vulnerable to unwanted things like bias, and we may scare off potential reviewers, which we don't want to do. We particularly want to do this given that apparently, according to PubMed in 2018, 10% of reviewers account for about 50% of reviews, and there's growing reviewer fatigue. So in light of that, we're going to have a bit of a session about some interesting components of open peer review and some questions we're going to have a bit of a debate about. So we've got 5 questions. We'll try and go through them pretty quick. I suspect there may be a bit of consensus about the first 2, maybe less so for the last ones. So just double check, Ginny and Simine, you can hear me? All right, and we were expecting David as well, but anyway. So it's my great pleasure to invite 2 of our 3 panelists. So we have Ginny Barbour and we have Professor Simine Vazire as well. Ginny is the incoming Editor-in-Chief of the Medical Journal of Australia. And Simine, correct me if I'm wrong, you're still Editor-in-Chief of Collabora Psychology as well. And if David joins in later, we'll add him as well. So basically, just to get started, I don't know if the poll's working. Can everyone see the poll? All right. So the first question we're going to put to Ginny and Simine was, do we think that all reviews should be signed, yes or no? And how do I put up the poll? Oh, great. Just so we can see what people are thinking. Interesting. I should say this has been intentionally made binary so that there aren't any fence sitters. There's no room for nuance in this debate at the moment, so we'll just push on. I think we thought there might be a bit more consensus with this. There's probably a lot to discuss about this, but just so that we get this off the table and out of the way, 50-50, interesting, all right. Okay, so for the next question, when we're ready, is anonymous peer review incompatible with current preprinting culture? What do we think? So when you're ready, Eden, feel free to progress it. While this is happening, Ginny or Simine, did you have any thoughts about compatibility of anonymous peer review with preprinting culture? We can hear you. Ginny, did you want to say anything about anonymous peer review and preprinting? Are we having audio issues? Sorry. I didn't realize you were muted, sorry. I thought it was
I thought we were being deliberately silenced there.
There will be no debate.
There will be no debate. Simine, you go first.
Sure. So I've been a huge proponent of masking authors' identities during peer review, and it's come up a lot that maybe preprints that goes against the ethos of preprints, and I'm also a big advocate of preprinting. I don't think they're completely incompatible. Obviously, there's tension between them, but my position is that journals who coordinate peer review ought not to pass along information about who the authors are to reviewers, because that information is not relevant. So what we do at Collabora, for example, is we tell reviewers that we're intentionally sending them a masked version of the manuscript. Sure, there might be a preprint. We're asking them to please don't go and search for it before you do your review. So we try to stay unaware of the author's identities as long as you're part of the review process. If you happen to already have seen the preprint or whatever, that's okay, as long as you can still do the review. So we understand that we're not going to achieve perfect masking, but we're trying to kind of find this happy medium between supporting preprinting, but also trying to preserve some chance for mass peer review.
Yeah, and I'll just say, look, I support that completely. I think that if we kind of assume that you can only, if things are binary, it becomes, really means that you haven't put enough effort, I think, into thinking through the processes. And, we do know that most reviewers do things in good faith. So I think that I really like that approach. The journal that I'm about to become EIC of, the Medical Journal of Australia, very unusually for a medical journal, actually has double anonymous peer review. That is really, really, and I was quite struck with it when I sort of first heard about it. I'm now more convinced that it has a great deal of value, but we can come on to the other side of the signed peer reviews a bit later.
Yes, hello there. I'd just like to add a comment in furious agreement with Simine. I believe that it's important to have anonymous peer review, but acknowledge the fact that if people dig hard enough, they can probably find out who the, and I'm also an advocate of double-blind peer review, knowing that peer reviewers can probably figure out who the authors are, but to do so, they've got to look at the paper carefully, and that gets us a long way along to improving the peer review process. Because the biggest problem with peer review is if people do superficial peer reviews, where they base their judgments on the identity of the authors or the institutions they come from.
Right, because I think we were interested in probably the next three questions more than these ones. We'll keep moving. So if you want to progress to the next question is, should all reviews, regardless of whether they're signed or not, of accepted papers be published, do we think? So these are the contents of the reviews. So maybe while this is happening again, if we go through the speakers to the panelists, we start with Ginny. What do you think about publishing peer review reports, regardless of whether they're signed or not?
Yeah, so I think the default should be that they should be published, but there are circumstances, and again, I'll come back to things like in the medical literature, or sort of say we're doing sensitive data or around threatened species or something like that, where there are times when you actually just can't do it. So I think the default should be to do it, but there should be rare exceptions.
Simine, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. No, I voted yes. I think that to me, that's one of the least controversial aspects of opening up peer review, that I think the content of peer reviews has a lot of value for readers. And I think another value that is often underappreciated, it's not just, if for anyone interested in that particular paper, the peer review history could be really informative. The other thing it's really useful for is to get journals' reputations to be better calibrated to what they deserve. So right now, very, very selective journals can tell us, oh, we do really rigorous peer review, that the 2% of manuscripts we accept are the very best 2%. And we have to just take their word for it or be skeptical, but we can't see inside the process. And there's just, in my mind, very little reason outside of maybe some rare exceptions, but in my field of psychology, I'd say I can't think of any good reasons why you wouldn't publish at least the peer review history for the accepted published papers.
Yes, so that brings up the issue of what happens. Is there some way that the peer reviews on papers that are not accepted, how could they be published, and who do they belong to? Do they belong to the authors of the paper who that's been rejected, or do they belong to the peer reviewers, or do they belong to the publisher that's rejected the paper? So that's a much trickier question to answer, because currently you'll only ever see the positive peer reviewer comments, or eventually positive peer review comments for papers that are accepted.
Well, that's timely, because the next question actually was, do we think that all reviews of rejected papers should be published?
Yeah, so once again, the question is where, are they given to the people whose papers are rejected, and is it left up to them? Can they use them however they like, or pass them on, or lampoon them in Twitter or Facebook? How do you actually publish a negative peer review when the paper hasn't been accepted?
Yeah, so I think implicit in this question is, should all papers be published before they go through peer review? Because it would be very weird to publish the peer review history of the paper if the paper itself isn't published. So I think if I voted yes here, slightly oversimplifying things, but I would like to live in a world where publication happens independent of evaluation and first, so that evaluators aren't gatekeepers, they're adding to the record. So the record is there publicly available anyway. And then in that world where evaluation happens after and separate from publication, then it's a lot easier to solve that problem of where is the review published. It could be published wherever the preprint or the paper appears.
Yeah.
I think in the world we live in now where that's not the case. So for example, at Collabora, we don't require that manuscripts that are submitted to Collabora exist as preprints. So we publish the peer review history for accepted papers, but what we do for rejected papers, and I think another like no-brainer to my mind, and I think we've all been in this situation as authors or reviewers or whatever, where we're in this gray area of who owns the review, and are authors allowed to share their own reviews of their own work, and it's unclear who they're allowed to share it with. And obviously they're allowed to share it with their co-authors, right? There's no debate about that. Everybody, I think, would agree they're allowed to share it with collaborators working on similar projects who might be interested to see how this kind of work is received or things like that. So where do you draw the line then? Can they post it publicly? And so one of the things we do at Collabora is we tell reviewers from the beginning, from the reviewer invitation, and we tell authors too, that the authors are going to have the right to do whatever they want with their reviews. If the paper is published, we'll publish the review history anyway. If the paper is rejected, the authors can choose. If they want to post the reviews, if they want to carry them over to a new journal, if they want to, whatever they want to do, the reviewers don't own it, the journal doesn't own it. So just to make that explicit, because I think otherwise nobody really knows.
Yeah, and I think that the key point there is that you're giving the authors the kind of the power in the relationship, as it were. PLOS does something similar, which is they give the authors the opportunity to publish peer reviews or not, and they and then the reviewers can sign them or not. But the choice ultimately is with the authors, and I think that's exactly where it should go. And can I just put in a thing just to think about here is that the other key part of it is, of course, the editorial decision letters. Editors are never anonymous. Well, at least they shouldn't be. And those editorial reviews, editorial decisions are really important, and those have to be part of the record as well. So it's definitely not just about peer reviews, it's about the whole process.
And I think another really important reason to give authors that right to share reviews and decision letters is you see a lot of conversations on social media where authors claim that something terrible happened to them in peer review, and their hands are tied. So they can't prove it, because they could legitimately say, and I think sometimes honestly believe, and maybe this is the case, no one really knows, that they're not allowed to share their own peer review history. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this as editor is to, one is like take the handcuffs off authors if they want to share it, but the other is it protects us. If someone says, I had this terrible experience at Collabora, the reviewers, hated my paper because of this reason, then if someone asks, oh, can you show us the history? And they say no, then, that kind of lends less credibility to their criticism. So we're opening ourselves to valid criticism, but we're also protecting ourselves, I think, from invalid criticism, because there's no reason why someone wouldn't share the peer review history in that kind of situation. Yeah.
And then the other kind of interesting twist to that is that I've seen this so many times, is people a paper gets rejected, and when the reviews are not signed, and the authors complain furiously and say, I absolutely know it was X that reviewed their paper, and of course it wasn't X that reviewed their paper. So you can also protect yourself by signing something. You don't necessarily get blamed for a bad peer review you didn't do. But yeah, we'll come back to
maybe we should come back to the signing, because there was much more disagreement than we expected on the first question. So that could be interesting to chat about.
Yeah.
We have one more question as well. We could go back to the first, but would you like to go to the final question, or would you like to go back?
The final one's more open-ended, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe we should go back to the first one because it's more binary, and then do the open-ended one.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
I'm not sure if Eden's able to go back, but just as a reminder, the first question was whether we think all reviews should be signed, yes or no.
So just to be clear, when we said that we thought there would be agreement, we thought that most people would say no, just in case that was unclear. I think because it says all reviews, that was my reason for thinking that this wouldn't be that controversial, that people shouldn't be forced to sign reviews if they don't want to, that there are legitimate reasons not to. My other reason to worry about this is that we don't know the sociological, psychological, political consequences of this. Like, will people write as critical reviews if they're signed? I'm even nervous. So I used to sign all my reviews and I sign all my reviews and sign my name. Now I've switched to just this is a signed review and sign my name, because I don't want to commit to always signing my reviews, because I could imagine a scenario where that would make me not say the thing I really believe or something like that. But that's also tricky. If you don't sign all your reviews, let's say you just sign the positive ones and you're like trying to curry favor. So I try not to do that. I try to sign all the reviews. I basically try to sign all my reviews, but I think it gets a lot more complicated when you try to actually apply that policy of everybody signing all their reviews. And I'm really worried that it'll make critical reviews less common and make people bite their tongues more.
Yeah, I think the success of PubPeer has been because it fiercely protects the anonymity. And if that was removed from PubPeer, for example, I think its value would greatly decline. And I think that like voting, it's something where I prefer to be anonymous.
Yeah. I think this comes back again to choice. So I mean, there's two things. One is that I used to be so personally, I sign all the reviews that I do, and I get extremely irritated if journals won't let me do that. That really annoys me, actually. But I don't see the reason why they reviewers should not be allowed to sign reviews if they don't want to. So I choose not to review for journals that's the case. The second one is that I've certainly from thinking that it ought to be very easy to do. I'm in a very privileged position, and I recognise that. And I've talked to people about this who've been very distressed at the thought of having to sign reviews, and in fact have had extremely bad experiences. And one in particular that sticks in my mind was a mid-career female researcher who had had an extremely bad experience that she felt had really affected her her career. So yeah, definitely no to all reviews being signed, but I think the opportunity should be there.
Yeah, I think it's quite unethical actually to not let reviewers sign if they want to. I don't understand the logic behind journals that remove reviewers' names from their reviews.
Can I add one other extra little bit to this? I know we're getting to time. Is that the thing that also really annoys me is I don't think we should be doing anonymous reviewers doing confidential comments to editors unless there is an extremely good reason. Because the number of times authors get a paper where the reviews seem pretty good, and the editor has said, the reviewer has said something really damning in the confidential comments. I personally, again, won't do those. I put everything that goes to the author also goes to the editor and vice versa. I think that's a really unethical process, actually.
Completely agree.
The answer to this question is yes and no. Okay. So we've got about maybe 7 minutes left, so there might be a good opportunity to jump to the final question. And the final question we want to put to the audience is, what experiments do you think we should do when it comes to peer review, or what evidence do we need, or where is evidence lacking, do we think? I understand this is a difficult question. There's papers being written about what we don't know about peer review, I read the other day.
I'll just mention the experiment that Nature did at one stage, where they allowed authors to opt as to whether their papers were anonymously reviewed or not. And I think most people opted to have their identity known by the reviewers. But the trouble was, if it was somebody famous and influential, then they would have their name known. And if it was somebody who was a lower profile, then they would opt for an anonymous review. But then the reviewers would know, whether they were reviewing the paper from somebody famous or not. And I think that ended up influencing the outcome. So that's an experiment that basically wasn't revealing because of the design of the experiment.
I'll throw another one out there. One thing that when we're like discussing what journal policies that journals have been involved with, that people have very strong intuitions about, and I think we have very little data about, is whether authors prefer multiple rounds of revision and so on versus an up or down decision, or like basically either accept with minor revisions or conditional accept versus reject. But these like extensive revise and resubmits that you still might get rejected after, or you might have to do more rounds of revisions. Like I think a lot of editors feel like they're helping the authors. It's very, it helps like graduate students, it gives them some training and education and so on. I find that attitude quite condescending, and that if authors are submitting their paper, they think it's a finished product. And if you don't like it, you should reject it. And maybe another journal will like it, or maybe the authors will agree with the feedback and revise it, but they can still go to another journal, even if they actually would have been happy to do the things you wanted them to do. But I find that's very controversial, and everybody justifies their position based on what they think authors want. And I think we just don't know whether authors would rather get extensive, detailed feedback that potentially helps really improve the paper, gives them another chance to get into this journal, or would rather get an up or down decision. If it didn't work out at that journal, they can try a different journal and take the feedback or not.
One thing I would really love to do that I think is probably one of the hardest is actually comparing it between different disciplines, because I think that traditionally medicine has done some stuff, you know, a lot of the early studies were done at the BMJ, for example, but we really don't know enough about the different culture between different disciplines to know what will work there. And I'm very wary of, you know, applying one thing to one discipline when it works somewhere else.
Yeah. There's some great ideas in these responses.
Yeah.
And just to, I hope we're capturing this, because just to say to the audience, so when I start at the MJA, I'm really keen to explore some of these ideas. So
yeah, I like fact checking and peer review. I think is a really interesting one. I don't know if that's what this person meant, but like right now we focus so much on these kind of subjective overall qualitative evaluations and not very much on like checklist type things of, is this information reported? Is this information accurate? Has it been tested for reproducibility, or, you know, some kinds of accuracy you can test, just internal consistency within the results reported. Like, why don't we consider that an integral part of peer review? That's actually easier in some ways than these qualitative evaluations where you need real expertise. A lot of this other fact checking stuff could be resourced out to a broader range of people than just the experts who can do the more qualitative evaluations.
I'm really interested in the one on the impact of job insecurity on publishing culture. I think that's a very deep question to ask, but I think it's a really important one.
And the test of structured deliberation protocols for interactive review. I think the interactive review thing is a really like a lightning rod that people have very strong opinions about, partly because I think some journals that have incorporated interactive reviews, like the reviewers being able to converse with each other or having to come to a consensus among the reviewers, some of them I think have implemented that quite badly. And so then that kind of gave a bad name to the whole interactive review thing, but it can be done in a much more structured way, like the Replicats approach, where there isn't this forced consensus. You just can hear other people's reasons and then you can change your mind or not. But if one reviewer has like an insight that everybody else once that's brought to their attention agrees, then you can get a much better outcome, but you shouldn't force that kind of consensus. So I think, yeah, we haven't done nearly enough playing around with different models of communication among reviewers and trying to build consensus, or at least model where the lack of consensus is. Like that would be another benefit of publishing the peer review history, is being able to see what is the range of reviewers' opinions. Did all reviewers agree that this should be published, or was it mixed, or, you know?
One thing I wanted to add, we recently did a study looking at, we asked editors lots of different aspects about peer review. And one of the questions we asked were you happy with your processes when it comes to peer review? And the vast majority said yes. And a lot of people who were hesitant to change the elements of their peer review sort of filter that through the prism of being scared about losing reviewers. Do other of you have any thoughts about, do you struggle for getting reviewers already, or does that factor into your thoughts when you're thinking about changing policy at a journal?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a factor. I think that's like one of the reasons, yeah, for things like not forcing people to sign. I think that the like respecting reviewers' real and I think legitimate fears about retaliation and things like that is important. But more generally, yeah, I think thinking about what's in it for reviewers, what creates the best environment for them to be motivated to do it, motivated to do a good job, you know, things like that. I think, but again, we know very little about that. I think it would be really good to do more research on that.
Yeah, and giving them credit for doing the peer review and having that built in properly into sort of academic incentive structures. I mean, that's, you know, we've gone some way to that at the moment, but we're a very long way from having a way of properly representing the work that people do for peer review, I think.
So we've got 1 minute left. Ginny, is there anything else that you want to include or us to do with our final minute before we sign off?
No, I think this is fantastic. There's some great ideas here. I just think I would just really encourage people to think critically about what they want when they are asked to do peer reviews. You know, that's probably one of the, I know we feel like they're a chore, but actually, you know, they're an incredibly important part of the process. So I think, yeah, let's think about, you know, what we can actually do to enhance it for peer reviewers in particular.
In the spirit of the session, Eden, who's capturing the poll at the moment, I assume we'll put this data, we'll make it available to everyone if everyone has a bit of a closer read at some of this stuff as well. Okay, maybe we should sign off there just in the interest of time. So thank you very much, Ginny, Simine, and Davo for being here. I don't think we're taking any questions, are we? I think it's just straight on to the next session. So I'll leave it there. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great work.